Hi, welcome to Gospel with Greg, and in this video I'm going to be talking about judging. Specifically, I'm going to focus on exactly what judging is and kind of the different general ways we can commit it. A reason I really wanted to do this video is because I feel like judging is something that a lot of people in the world today, including in the church world as well, misunderstand. Um, and so this is in reference mostly to what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 and 2. I'll actually read that first and then talk about ways that I see people misunderstand it, just so the context is there. So starting off in Matthew 7, verse 1. Judge not that ye be not judged, for with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged, and with what measure ye mete, it shall be measured to you again. So again, that's Jesus speaking in his Sermon on the Mount, and he's telling us to not judge. And so there are a couple extremes I see in how this is misunderstood. So a lot of people in today's world kind of interpret judging as if you speak against anything, you're judging. So if you just generally say something's a sin, they'll say you're judging, even if it's not aimed at anybody in particular. And then there are some people that go to the opposite extreme, and I think it's in reaction to people that call any little thing judging, where they basically just ignore that altogether. By the way they act and speak to people, it's like they just don't even have a concept of judging. Or, anytime you say the word judging or judge, they just kind of, we shouldn't do that either, because clearly Jesus is telling us to not do something that's called judging, so we shouldn't just wave our hand at it too much. And so those are kind of the ways that I see judging misunderstood. And so I wanted to talk about what exactly it is, so we know what it is we're supposed to not be doing pertaining to that. And so when we look throughout the Bible just at judging, judgment, all that in general, generally we can see that there are two types of judging. There is the righteous judgment of God and unrighteous judgment of man and our flesh. And ultimately it boils down to judging in general is making a determination, whether it's the righteous judgment of God or the unrighteous judgment of men. Judging is making a determination. So judging people would be making determinations about people. And again, God's judgment, when he judges on Judgment Day, it's going to be perfect. It's going to be righteous judgment, because God is perfect and he knows everything, and he's all good. But the type of judging that Jesus is talking about here in Matthew 7 that he tells us not to do is the unrighteous judging. So essentially, judging is the type of judging that we're not supposed to do, is making unrighteous determinations about people, essentially. And so that kind of leads to the question, well, what are examples of that, or how could we end up doing that? So I'll go through a few, and we see examples of these in the Bible. So the first is assuming or accusing someone of committing sins that we don't know for sure that they committed. And so we can see that in the Bible, the Pharisees accused Jesus of blasphemy when he didn't do that. So they accused him of committing a sin that he didn't commit. And so we can do this sometimes in today's world, and I think people do it all the time, where people will, maybe hear something or see something, and they don't know the full context of it, and they'll just fill in the gaps in their head of, well, I'm sure they're doing this or that, when we don't know for sure that they are. And I think that that's very serious, because when we look at James chapter 1, we see in verse 15 that it says that sin brings forth death. So that is very serious. No matter what sin, you might be accusing somebody of committing, you're accusing them of something very serious. And so, we shouldn't just say, oh, I'm sure they're doing this, if we're not sure, because, again, we're slapping something pretty serious on them. And an illustration for that is the crime of false arrest. And so, when we think of situations like that where somebody is like a victim of false arrest, they are basically facing legal repercussions for something they didn't really do. And so not only is that kind of a hassle to go through that process, but you can end up having a very undesirable image placed on you that, could ruin your reputation. I mean, think about it, for yourself. What if somebody accused you of robbing a store when you didn't do it, and you ended up getting arrested for it? You probably wouldn't enjoy that, but spiritually, that's what we can do sometimes through judging in that way. A second way that we can judge is assuming someone's misfortunes are God's punishment on them. And now sometimes God does chastise us for things to teach us, kind of like a parent might punish a child for breaking the rules so they don't do it again. But sometimes people can do this falsely, and they'll twist the verse that you reap what you sow. So maybe there's somebody that they got fired from their job, or they're facing some kind of medical issue, and people will look at that, well, you reap what you sow. What'd they do to get in that situation? What sin did they commit to where God's punishing them like that? And that kind of goes into the first one. You're starting to assume that they've committed sins that they maybe didn't. And, my parents said that they heard cases of this, when they were kind of growing up. They would hear certain people kind of talk about somebody else who faced a hardship and be like, well, if they was closer to God, they probably wouldn't have went through that. And that really flies in the face of something we see in Job, where Job's friends kind of brought that up of, what did Job do to where God's punishing him by taking all these things away, when they didn't know the full context was Satan was permitted to torture Job temporarily because God knew he was a righteous servant and that he would stay faithful. And so, again, we can judge in that way. A third way that we can see is measuring people by false or altered law. And so sometimes our society will come up with social rules or cultural norms, and those aren't always bad, of course. I'm not saying that's inherently wrong, but sometimes our society will have these certain kind of this social code, and some people will like condemn someone like they're committing a sin if they don't follow it. I've seen people before that, our society has made up these rules that like it's not socially acceptable if you talk to yourself or laugh at your own jokes and all that. And some people will just like condemn somebody and, treat them like they're awful if they do those things. And they're, acting like, again, it's like they act like it's God's law, and we shouldn't do that. And, sometimes that can kind of get, when it comes to the church world, there are sometimes people that will take maybe even godly doctrine, like dress modest, and they'll turn it into this. They'll add their own things into it of you have to have, a certain, like, you can't have facial hair, or your sleeve length has to be so many inches long, and you have to have a certain type of shirt, rather than just leaving it at dress modest, and, different things like that, and respectable. Or, people will take things like marriage that God created and can be a blessing when we go about it in ways that God has told us to, but then people will add little things of, oh, you have to get married by this age, married and kids by 25, and they'll throw that stuff in there, and they'll talk to the person like, what are you doing wrong in your life to where that ain't happened yet? And, so they're adding those little things in there. And so we can do it both ways. It can happen in secular world and in the church world. It can be something we drum up completely on our own, or sometimes we can add those man-made details into what God said when we really need to just leave it at what God said. We don't need to add our own stuff to it. And so kind of judging people by man-made law as if it were God's law is another type of judging. And something that I think that is particularly kind of bad about that, if we take it too far especially, is it's almost like we're saying, God, I don't trust you to decide what's right and wrong. You need my help. Let me add a few things at the end, write a few things in at the end of the Bible, a few more, thou shalt not do this. And so, I think if we're Christians, we shouldn't want to make that statement like we don't trust God to determine morality, because God's perfect and we're not. Fourth way we can get into judging is not applying an equal standard. And Matthew chapter 7 verses 3 through 5 kind of talk about this. So this is right after the two verses I read at the beginning. And why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but considerest not the beam that is in thine own eye? Or how wilt thou say to thy brother, let me pull out the mote out of thine eye, and behold, a beam is in thine own eye? Thou hypocrite, first cast out the beam out of thine own eye, and then shalt thou see clearly to cast out the mote out of thy brother's eye. And so this right here, Jesus, really you can see this as he's giving us more context when he tells us to not judge, because sometimes we can get into judging when we don't apply this equal standard, and when we're being hypocrites, as he says here. We can get to a point where we say something's a sin till we want to do it, then it's not as bad. Or, sometimes we can extend that to other people we like as well. Maybe we'll see maybe a celebrity or a politician or just somebody else we know in our life that we don't care for do something that's wrong, and oh, look what they did. But then when a politician, a celebrity, somebody in our life that we do like does the same thing, it's, oh, well, they meant well, we make excuses for them. And so we can get into judging that way too, because maybe sometimes we'll even drill harder into the people we don't like just to try to create the difference of to get the people we do like off the hook of, oh, well, I'm sure they done this, and that. And that kind of gets into some of the earlier examples of judging too. And again, the ultimate example is when we want to make excuses for ourselves. And so ultimately, when it comes to these types of judging, and there are other kind of ways that we can commit judging, like, there are people that maybe they'll judge somebody, they'll see how somebody used to live, but God's clearly changed them and they've moved on, like they've genuinely changed and they have remorse for how they used to live, but people want to judge them now by how they used to be when God's already forgiven them for that, and that they've changed from that. And ultimately, something we need to remember about judging and unrighteous judgments that we can make about other people is that the ultimate standard when it comes to us in morality is the blood of Christ. At the end of the day, we've all committed sin. We like to point our fingers at other people of what they've done or what we think they've done, but all of us have done things where we could point in the mirror and say, you're not perfect either. And so I think that we should be grateful that, when it comes to being made right with God, the standard, what He's going to judge by, the determination He's going to make, isn't based on you and what you've done, because we'd all be doomed there. But it's, have you accepted Christ? That's what's going to make. That's what the determination is going to be on. And so ultimately, we should be grateful for that. That we have that perfect sacrifice of Christ that we can accept in our lives, so that when God makes His determination, we can hear, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." So hope you enjoyed this video, found it helpful. Until next time, God bless.